The Relic is a very dark movie. I don't mean dark in tone like American Psycho or Martyrs, but dark as in standing in the middle of a cave with a flashlight where your batteries are running out. Dark. This works as both a positive and a negative for the film. Director Peter Hyams has been making movies since the early 70s, mostly sci-fi like Outland in 2010, and action like Time Cop and Running Scared. The one genre he always wanted to do but never had the opportunity was horror. He grew up in West 77th Street in New York, directly across from the American Museum of Natural History. As a young art student, he spent most of his free time in the museum drawing. He had a recurring nightmare that he was in the museum under a diorama of a giant squid fighting a whale. The museum closed and he didn't realize it, and while trying to find a way out, he noticed the squid was no longer there. He never forgot that dream, and after becoming a director, he hoped to use it somehow in one of his films. After working on Sudden Death in 1995, Hyams got a call from producer Sherry Lansing, who asked him to do a film adaptation of the book, The Relic. He jumped at the chance, not only because it was a horror film, but because in the novel, it took place in the New York Museum of Natural History. This would give him an opportunity to film in his old neighborhood, as well as a way to infuse some of his own nightmare into the film. Unfortunately, due to some issues with the previous production, the museum refused to let them film there. After some searching, they were able to get the okay to film in the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. With the location locked and a roughly $40 million budget, they moved forward to make what Hyams called an upscale horror movie, a claustrophobic horror film in the vein of Alien. For him, horror was about what you couldn't see, the hidden monster hiding just on the other side of the darkness, waiting to kill you. Hyams is a rarity in Hollywood that for most of his films, he was both the cinematographer and the director. He knows the shots he wants to get and doesn't feel the need to relay it through another person. He also has a love of the use of light and wanted to really drive it home with the production. He's seen way too many horror films where the scene was supposed to be dark, but was brightly lit. He wanted to use this opportunity to push the contrast of light and dark, to have some scenes where the characters were enrobed in darkness. He's always directed with a heavy emphasis on shadow, which he felt brought more to a scene. He went to the heads of Paramount to express how he wanted to make the film, and initially, they balked at the idea. After much coaxing, they agreed to let him film the movie with a heavy reliance on darkness. Hyams had worked with Stan Winston before, so he hired his team for the creature effects. Winston and Crash McCreary designed the Cthulhu monster, a creature much like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, in that it was a mixture of practical and CGI. Also like Jurassic Park, whenever the monster's stationary or up close, it's practical, but when it's moving, it's CGI. Winston told Hyams the best thing to happen to Alien and Jaws was that the creatures didn't work, so they had to use them less. As such, they had a greater impact when finally revealed. Hyams decided to follow in those footsteps and keep the monster hidden for most of the film. When it was seen, it was either behind something or partially in shadow, and they held back until later in the film to give it a full reveal. The Cthulhu monster is the right amount of scary. Who wouldn't be afraid of a giant wheezing monstrosity that can climb up walls, and in order to survive, it has to decapitate you and eat your brain? As a callback to Hyams' nightmare, two kids get stuck in the museum after it closes and run into the monster. The Grand Hall scenes were filmed on site in the Field Museum, as well as the exteriors, but most everything else was on set in Los Angeles. Hyams loves the movie Alien, so when you see Chains in Water, it's an homage to Ridley Scott and the movie. For the scenes in the tunnels with the flashlights had their power boosted to make them brighter than normal. Some of the tunnels were real tunnels in the Chicago area. With the use of flashlights and non-traditional lighting in the film, this created more than a few lens flares. Although unlike the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, the flares were real and not digitally added in post. Hyams wanted Tom Sizemore for the lead officer. He's played cops in the past, and the director felt he had a certain intensity and always delivered a commanding performance. He hired Penelope Ann Miller as Dr. Green, and the wonderful Linda Hunt as Dr. Cuthbert. He also took this opportunity to hire classic actor James Whitmore, somebody he greatly admired. Being that this was still the 90s, Hyams was able to make the film rated R without any problems from the studio pushing for PG-13. This gave him the freedom to have plenty of gruesome scenes without having to pull the camera away or edit them out. For the decapitated security guard, they took a full body cast of the actor and ripped it apart. When the SWAT team pulled half the guy back on the roof, that wasn't a dummy. They covered the actor's legs in green and keyed them out. Later in the film, the security alarms and the sprinklers go off, The director admitted there was no real reason for the sprinklers to go, other than that he thought it would look cool. With the lights reflecting off the water and the glass, it did look great, but it made shooting more complicated. In the end, it was worth it because it made the museum scenes that much more visually interesting. After the film was finished, they played it for test audiences. While the general consensus was positive, Himes felt a disconnect when the audience didn't cheer as the monster died. Originally, the final confrontation ended when Dr. Green throws the chemical and sets the creature on fire. Himes asked producer Sherry Lansing for a few $100,000 and some time to shoot a new ending. She agreed, and he added the part where the monster chases the doctor to the water tank and then explodes. They played the movie for a new audience, and this time, they cheered. So this makes for one of the rare occasions when a test audience actually benefited a film. Originally, they were planning on releasing the film in 1996, but with the additional scenes and some extra post-work, it was delayed until 1997. A few days before the film premiered, there was some market research saying that it was going to flop. An R-rated horror film with no big stars going up against Jackie Chan's First Strike and Turbulence? While at the same time, other big movies like Scream, Jerry Maguire, Michael, and Evita were still in their early weeks. It looked like The Relic was going to open in 4th place. Himes was depressed until he got a call from Lansing, letting him know the movie opened in 1st place, with a number that was 5 times higher than predicted. Himes enjoyed shooting The Relic so much, he followed it up with the apocalyptic horror film, End of Days. While he likes making what he calls upscale horror films, he's still putting cat scares in them.
You figure all that out by yourself?
What?
Shit!
What?
Cat!
Shit. What?
All right, I knew that was gonna happen.
As I mentioned, the darkness worked for and against the film. It was fine in theaters, but now on home video, VHS at the time, a bad transfer made it look too dark. After that, when it was released on DVD, it was still too dark, and you couldn't see half the things that you would have seen if you saw the movie in theaters. This caused a huge backlash in the film, as people called Himes crazy for shooting it so dark. They also made all kinds of stupid claims, like how he only shoots with natural light. Considering most of the film was shot in sound stages, it had to be artificial light since there's no natural light on a soundstage. Recently, the film was released on Blu-ray, and it's as close to the theatrical release as it's ever been. Yes, it's still dark, but the new transfer allows the film to be seen in the way it was intended in 1997, and not the way it's been seen for well over the past decade. I wonder if the transfer had been better if they would have continued the film series. My only gripe is that for a giant monster that loudly wheezes all the time, it seems to get from place to place, almost as if by teleportation. For example, how did it sneak into the security booth and kill the guard without the other guy noticing? The movie's not as cerebral as something like The Shining, but it's more than a few steps above your average monster movie. I've heard the book's better, but I've never read it, so I can't say. Although that almost seems to be a given statement on any movie based on a book or a book series. Even with the new transfer, the film's still not for everyone. It's easier to see now, but the darkness does permeate the film, which I'm sure would annoy people used to seeing day-for-night shots like this. Probably the same people that would go in to play a survival horror game and turn the contrast all the way up. I admire Himes sticking to his guns and making the horror film that he wanted to make. He took what could have easily been an Alien knockoff and turned it into an effectively creepy, claustrophobic creature feature. With the extreme use of contrast, it gives the film a distinct look that at times is strikingly beautiful. I take this over the constant need to boost the highlights and color correct everything sepia. The Relic pushed the limits of light and dark in a mainstream film. It's a rarity that absolutely deserves another viewing if you've only seen it on VHS or DVD. Wait till night, turn off the lights, and give it a second chance. There could be a monster hiding just out of sight. Never mind. It's probably just the cat.
What?
Shit!
In any case, our superstition exhibit is excellent box office for this museum, and that benefits you as well.
Using superstition to bring people to the museum is like hiring topless ushers for the Bolshoi Ballet.
Well, if they did, I might go to the ballet.